that's why they do come, and we tend to look at the glass half full rather than half empty. Having said that, there may be various reasons why a country does not ratify a convention. There are cases in which this is due to a strong opposition to what the convention actually says, but there are also cases in which simply the national legislation has not been implemented in order to do so. And sometimes I would say there may be also a lack of awareness of, I wouldn't say the existence of the convention, but maybe about the urgency of that convention to be ratified, or the need of that convention. A good example is indeed the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which has been around for a long time. You have around 40-something states that haven't ratified it. I wouldn't dare to say that anybody is openly against fighting genocide, but there may be various reasons, such as, for example, the need to change your criminal code to provide for the crime of genocide explicitly in your national legislation and so on. This is why the treaty event exists, and this is why we try to highlight certain treaties in the course of the treaty event to remind states of the existence of those treaties, the importance they have, and the important signal they may send to the international community by taking action on those treaties. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, yes, please.
Well, as you did say, it is true. When you refer to the Security Council, what can be done? There has been an initiative by France and Mexico, sitting at that time as a non-permanent member, to reach an agreement within the Security Council that those permanent members with the veto will never use that veto whenever there is a case which is crystal clear that this case, if not addressed, will result to the commission of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes. But that initiative has not been yet accepted. And this led finally to another initiative, this time at the level of the General Assembly, led by Liechtenstein, which has been so far signed by near 120 member states, and which aim the same, I would say, goal, to ensure that the world will not allow a situation to remain unaddressed when we see that genocide is looming, crimes against humanity are going to be committed. And I will use this opportunity to invite those member states which have not yet signed the act to do so, because that will be a very important tool also for prevention.
Okay. We still have about half a dozen or so hands, so I'm going to try and cluster a few, and maybe take 3 at a time. So why don't you speak, and then you, and then you, and then they'll answer that cluster. Okay.
Well, so if I could just ask you 2 questions, I'll try to make them as short as possible. Do you have a strategy to get the Security Council to actually take decisive action on genocide, cases like that of Myanmar that you mentioned? If that is not in your domain, then how is it that this remains relevant? This entire process remains relevant beyond just sensitization, as first. The second is 8,000 Sikhs were killed in a genocide in 1984 in India. Till today, 34 years later, the courts in India are hearing cases. They've appointed special investigation teams. But little or nothing really has been done for these families. Justice delayed is justice denied. So is it even on your agenda, that genocide of 1984?
Okay. My name is Anna. I'm one of the RAF fellows. I work with the Nation newspaper in Nigeria. I'd like to take you back to your statements where you said something about ringing the bell and taking action. Now, regarding the uprising in Cameroon, where you have the English-speaking part, and the media reporters liken the killing to genocide, what is the UN doing about that? And also, in the Middle Belt part of Nigeria, you've had issues of herdsmen, killings, and farmers, and you've had people citing it as genocide. What is the UN doing about that? So that's my question.
Yes, Ian Najjar, Syrian American newspaper. My question is, like in Idlib right now, they have around 4 million people. After that agreement, if they go through, let's say that agreement go through, everything is fine. What's the human rights is going to happen for them and for the people over there? People are scared, and over 1 million people die, get killed. 7, 8 million refugees around the world, especially in Europe, Turkey, and Lebanon. How's that people is going to return to Syria? What's your opinion, guys? Let me know.
Well, I mean, on the question of the sick, we say justice delayed, justice denied. I do, of course, agree with that formula. However, as you know, my mandate is a mandate which is looking forward, which has been established only in 2005 and trying to prevent. And this first. And second, my mandate is not to make a legal determination whether this crime is a genocide or not. That legal determination can be made only by a court of justice, as we have seen, for instance, at The Hague with the ICTY or in Rwanda with the ICTR. So to my view, one needs simply, of course, to make sure that whenever and wherever serious crimes are committed, it has to be dealt with celerity, because if you don't deal with those crimes committed in the past, you are going to face one day, sooner or later, such a level of frustration which can therefore, I would say, push for the commission of other crimes. And that's why we need to really encourage that the cases be dealt with more celerity. Now about Cameroon and Nigeria. Well, I mean, I'm not placed to define a strategy for the Security Council. The only thing I can say is that I hope that the Security Council will play a more stronger role when it comes to prevention. And as a matter of fact, when the Secretary General Antonio Guterres met with the Council in April last year, he urged members of the Security Council to work closely with his special advisor on the prevention of genocide, to work closely with me. What does it mean? Does it mean, look, you guys make sure that the work the special advisor is doing be used for the best prevention measures you can take. Because imagine that you have situation being handled by the Security Council today which could have been prevented, you know. So that's something which can be done. So going back to Cameroon and Nigeria, I mean, we are following, of course, with concern the situation in Cameroon. My colleague Francois Fall, who is the special representative of the Secretary General for Central Africa, has been traveling there. And myself, I am documenting what is happening. And it is simply, I think, urgent that peace prevail in those regions. Having said that, we have also to make it clear. The situation in Cameroon should not lead to any, I would say, secession. I mean, at a time, my dream is to see the dream of Kwame Nkrumah, the dream of Mwalimu Nyerere, the dream of Marcus Garvey becoming a reality, having Africa being united. You know, even Bob Marley sing it. Africa get united. Why? I mean, to try to divide. I mean, if Europe is one, United States is one. And I can tell you, if Africa become united, I'm sure we will not see most of what is happening today. We will not witness large flocks of young people trying to seek greener pasturage beyond the Mediterranean Sea. So that means we need to fight in that regard, but not to really encourage any form of secession. That means those who are ruling should also be more committed to manage diversity in the most constructive manner. Because if there is something which, as I said earlier, is not acceptable, that is exclusion. We have to make sure that no one is excluded. We have to make sure that everybody could get the same rights, access to education, access to health, access to employment, and in other words, make sure that you have strong institutions, a strong judiciary, a courageous parliament which truly represent the peoples. And at the end of the day, we will see peace prevailing in that country. And regarding the situation of the herdlers and the farmers, this is also a result of, once again, the consequences of many issues, including even climate change. When you have the farmers who no longer have facilities, and the herdlers have also their cows to provide, looking for water here and there. And water is going to be one of the most serious issues also in the future. We are working on it, and in 2 weeks' time, I'll be visiting Nigeria. I will be discussing on this issue and trying to see how we can prevent an escalation of this violence between herdlers and farmers.
Okay, there's still a large number of hands up, and I'm sorry, but we won't be able to accommodate now that we've gotten more or less an hour and a half into this briefing. So at this stage, I do have to read out one final announcement, which has just come in, which is the following. The Secretary General welcomes the appointment by UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, and the UN Migratory Agency, IOM, of Mr. Eduardo Stein, former Vice President and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Guatemala, as a joint special representative for Venezuelan refugees and migrants in the region. The magnitude and complexity of the outflow of Venezuelan refugees and migrants in the region and beyond require concentrated efforts and an all-inclusive regional approach to find adequate protection responses and solutions to their plight. And with that, I would like once again to thank our guests, Mr. Jeng and Mr. Villalpando. Thanks very much. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
The Swedish mission is extremely proud and honored to be co-hosting this event. It's a very timely report as it provides important input to ongoing processes, and I know that all member states here and representatives of the various bodies inside the UN are extremely busy working with this. We especially welcome the focus on the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, and how financial flows are supporting the implementation of these important objectives in the report. It's also timely in view of the Secretary General's high-level meeting on financing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which will be held here in New York next week. I just want to say that we are looking at various meetings, seminars, sequences, and it's all very well thought out. But let's not forget about the SDGs, what it's all about. We are, it's apart from being a fantastic multilateral achievements in a time where international cooperation is going astray in many other areas, it is, I think, fair to say that the 2030 Agenda is really the master plan for dignified, coexistence among people and nations if we look to the next generation. So we simply cannot fail in the implementation of this agenda, and of course the financing of it is key. So no matter what the political objectives and commitments will be, unless there is real money behind it, we are unfortunately likely to fail. So we need to get this right within and outside the UN system. The importance of the financing for development agenda in this regard, as outlined in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, cannot be overestimated. We have to make the most of existing financial resources. It will be key for succeeding in this endeavor. As the title of the report suggests, we also need to open doors, as you said, Henrik, to new and other modalities and possibilities. Some of these doors are already ajar, while others require more efforts from us and the UN system. And here I want to just pay tribute to Courtney and the Ambassador of Jamaica and Canada for the excellent work you're doing in this group of friends, where you're really exploring and exploiting and bringing up the possibilities of alternative financing. So the engagement among a broad variety of non-government actors is absolutely key component for success. And it is encouraging to see that with academia, civil society organizations, the private sector and investors, we feel a stronger and stronger ownership by the day. And to successfully implement the agenda, we must engage at both national and local levels. Governments cannot and will not be able to do this by themselves. It also requires, of course, a UN that is very much fit for purpose and geared and calibrated towards the implementation and focused on these goals. But it also then has to be funded in a solid, stable, and predictable manner. So this is why my country, Sweden, has really come in strongly politically and financially behind the Secretary General's reform agenda. Also, of course, when it comes to the reform of the UN development system. We're looking forward to the funding dialogue later this year with a view of finalizing the funding compact between the UN development system and the member states. And to achieve this, the UN must, we think, renew trust among member states and with member states. Making progress on achieving system-wide results, as well as improving results-based management, cost-effectiveness, long-term impact, accountability, and transparency is extremely important in this regard. The report that is launched here today will also, we believe, help to create better understanding of how the system is currently funded and what needs to improve. We believe that core and softly earmarked funding is the best way to ensure long-term, stable and flexible funding for the UN development system. The implementation of the 2030 Agenda requires a new level of integration and collaboration between the UN and donors. And to be able to provide qualitative funding also in the future, we must consider new funding modalities, including thematic and pooled funds, such as the proposed joint fund for the 2030 Agenda. We remain a large contributor. We have good experience of supporting country-level implementation through multi-partner trust funds. And I want to say, too, that we have committed to multi-year contributions to funds and programs, as we believe that that is the predictability that is required for these parts of the UN system to do their job in the long-term planning. So with that, Henrik, thanks again for allowing me to say a few words. I hope that this will be a useful event, and again, congratulations to the authors of the report.
Thank you, Ambassador Skog. That's very kind. And again, thank you to Sweden and for not only organizing this, but supporting our work. Jennifer, I'd like to turn to you now, actually, to do the presentation that everybody is waiting for. So without further ado, may I just call on you?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Henrik, for your really, really fantastic partnership, yourself and the Foundation, on this work dating back to report number 1. But really, as you say, it's evolved tremendously, and it's our pleasure and privilege to be able to work with you and team up on this. Thanks very much also to Ambassador Rattray and Ambassador Skog, both of you, for your presence here today, but as importantly for your support and engagement and leadership on this issue. And that is something that is so important in helping set a direction for the work that we support. I'd like a special thanks too to my colleagues in the Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office, Henriette in particular, who has really done a lot of the anchor work as it relates to the substantive data. And then a special thanks to Bruce Jenks, our co-author, our co-lead author, who has really given such a great deal of inspiration to this work, but is also an old friend and colleague, and therefore it's a special pleasure to team up on this with him and the Foundation every year. As Henrik said, we come at this from a background where a few years ago there was really a test case, but a testing of the waters to respond to a demand to try to make the funding and financing of the UN development system somehow more accessible for the conversation that was taking place in partners of the UN, with member states, with agencies, and in making it accessible to try to help put the numbers up front. And we've been, again, kind of true to that in the report. There are many reports where you get the headline themes discussed and the annexes in the back with all the numbers. We've deliberately tried to make the point and run a theme through this in the spirit of the late Hans Rosling and his work, that a theme that runs through around factfulness. And that's very much one of the reasons why we keep trying to keep the UN system evidence base on financing and funding up front and center to the report. The Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office, as was mentioned already, the reason that we engage on this is that this is an office that is hosted by UNDP and serves the system writ large on multi-stakeholder funding and pooled financing in particular across the pillars of work of development, peace, humanitarian, and climate financing. So it gives us a kind of a unique access and role in terms of looking at the financial data and trends across the system. So we're very happy to be able to help unpack that. One of the other kind of themes in accessibility that we come at this work with, and then I'll dive into the report itself, is a message about simplicity and complexity. And that is that on the surface, it can look like the funding of the UN development system and the funding of the UN system overall is in a way quite simple. You know, that it's grant contributions that come in and grant contributions that go out, and how difficult could that be? And and what the report tries to do is show that it's both much more complex than that because of the different instruments, drivers, and determinants and definitions and characteristics of funding. But the complexity also comes because of now, with the demands of the 2030 agenda and with everything that's on the table looking forward, is that positioning of the system within that larger environment is what's really going to make the difference for impact and effectiveness. And it's in that positioning and repositioning that the complexity comes. So we'll come back to that, and Bruce will discuss more deeply some of the contributions and the themes. So I will do what is known as a whistle-stop tour, I think, through this report. And as Henrik says, it's quite long and there's a lot there. So my apologies, because I'm going to do a light walk through on some of the framing of the report, the main component parts and the headlines from there. But I really do encourage you to come back to us, ask questions, flag things that we might have got wrong, and that will enrich this exercise in the future. So the report comes in two parts, similar to last year. The first part is the numbers up front, as I was saying. So what we do is look at the UN system revenue, expenditure, and then have a comment on data quality to try to keep pushing that forward. The second part of the report is where we refer to as a kind of a marketplace of ideas. So that's where we get more into the beyond the UN systems funding flows, that we look at many of the wider financing issues and what's driving those, and why the UN should be paying attention to and aware of the dynamics in the wider environment. So the second part is a much more analytical look at perspectives coming from guest authors. We have a number of them in the room today, and we'll go through those. So very quickly on the numbers up front, we start with the revenue overall. and what the big picture looks like in the most aggregate form. So what we see here, it's interesting to dig into the component parts of all of this. There are tables that break that down and look at what's inside all of this. But at the most aggregate level of the data picture, of the revenue picture, what we see is a total figure that is up about $1 billion from last year at 49.3. There's a bit of an increase in the overall figure on the UN revenue. But within that, the part of the mix, which is the predictable unearmarked portion, is down a little bit. So within the box where you see the changes is a slight increase in that brown earmarked contribution component in relation to last year. This slide just gives you a bit of a timeline on that earmarked to unearmarked picture. So what we see is not only last year to this year an increase in the earmarked component, but a very strong uphill trend line in the relationship between the earmarked in brown portion of, this is the UN operational activities, so this is development and humanitarian. This slide is not the system writ large, but that trend line in the core to the earmarked contribution is something that has had that even steeper in the last few years. In a lot of the UNDS repositioning discussions that sets a base of let's look at 30% of core in the system, etc. What this picture tells you is that the last time that core was 30% of the overall UNDS revenue picture was in 2004. This is a similar one in the core to earmarked balance in the mix, but it looks at the UN development system in relation to the other major multilaterals. And so what this tells you is that among the other major multilaterals, that the UN system is the only one among the international financial institutions, the regional development banks, and the other major multilaterals that is overwhelmingly reliant on earmarked funding. This is the quick snapshot of the functional split within the overall UN system funding mix. So rather than by type of contribution, by the function that they perform. So what we see here is the operational activities for development, humanitarian and development together at 66%. In terms of a change in the mix, that's a little bit up from last year, with the increase more on the humanitarian component of it than the development component of it, and a slight decrease in the normative standard setting functional part. That was up closer to 20% last year. One of the things we're working on in the report is to continue to strengthen the data quality. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but in particular, the data quality around that normative and standard setting function is where we have some of our biggest struggles. I'll put it nicely. This picture we put there not just because it's colorful and kind of pretty, although I do like to have it there because it is colorful and kind of pretty. But it's an interesting one because we did it for the first time last year. It was a little hard to get at the numbers, and they were a little better this year, so we'll keep drilling into it. But what it does is it shows within the DAC countries. This was data we could get from the DAC, actually, and it was we haven't yet done it with a larger perspective, although we'll continue to try in future. But it looks at within the ODA engagement of these countries, what is the source of revenue from within those national budgets. So what we see, interestingly, is that while the engagement with the SDGs in many countries is still significantly coming through revenue of sources from foreign ministries and from development ministries, that it is a more complex picture than that there is a significant engagement of sectoral ministries, of health, of environment, of forestry, of education, etc., that are making contributions to the UN and the multilateral system. So it shows an interesting engagement of the domestic agenda, the international dimension of a domestic agenda and how that's financed, and it also tells something about the complexity of partnerships that are required in a wider, more diverse SDG framework. As I mentioned earlier, one of the function of the Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office is to support what the name suggests, multi-stakeholder financing, and in particular pooled funds. So what we've done is increasingly invested in making sure there's a data differentiation in that earmarked component to look at quality and to make sure we can track the more flexible types of financing in the earmarked component. So this looks at, across a number of contributing countries, the breakdown of the proportion between earmarked pooled funding and core funding, and we can see that there's quite a diversity in that mix too. This does the same with a number of non-DAC contributors and includes also the portion of funding which are local resources, that are domestic resources invested through the UN system in the countries, in the host countries indicated. This looks at a similar picture on the flexible and the pooled funding by contributor, not DAC. This is a UN data source, but looks at, for example, the proportion of the contributions from each of these countries that are coming through flexible and pooled funds, in particular interagency pooled funds, not by volume. There is a volume table in the report as well, but by percentage. And it's interesting because it just shows in the portfolio mix of different countries, there's a QCPR indicator, as we know, that has a tracking on 10% and 15% and above of the portion of a portfolio within member states that go through pooled funding. So this just allows to track those countries and look at those countries that are already above 10, 15, 20, and some like Qatar and Belgium, et cetera, that are well above that in the proportional mix. This does a similar take from the UN entity point of view, looking at the proportion within the portfolio mix on the non-core side that comes through pooled funds of each of the agencies. OCHA is up there at the beginning, at the highest level, which is not surprising because it's a coordination function, so it's a little bit different. But when you look across the operational and specialized agencies from UNFPA across, we see that flow. There's also an indication in the QCPR and in the WHS targets and others about agencies having a proportional mix in the non-core of 15% of through pooled funds, so it helps look at that distribution. Last one, I believe, on the part one, on the data part of the report, on the whistle-stop version, and that is we wanted to take a look as well at where was our largest expenditures at the country level, where the UN system overall, not just the development system, now this includes peace and peace spending as well, where those largest spends are at the country level taken together, and what's the composition of the mix within each country. And what that tells us is not only what are the biggest spending countries, but within those countries, how much of an element and an importance when we start to look at issues related to the nexus and working and flexibility and these sorts of issues, how much is going to be related to alignment with peace and transition when it comes to peace operations with development and humanitarian, how much of that conversation is a humanitarian development nexus, how much development funding is going into these countries, and most of these ones are also in the post-crisis, crisis or post-crisis context. So it helps unpack the discussion around the dynamics of financing and flexible financing in the nexus. As I said, we have some space in the report for exploring data quality. I won't go into many details on that because it is a very detailed subject, but what we really wanted to kind of make a statement on there was the importance of ever more high-quality investment in getting the evidence base stronger. It is a struggle to do this work. It's a pleasure. It's part of our job, and we hope that it enriches the conversation. But there's lots of work still ahead on quality, on harmonization, on definitions, on all of these things in order to be able to have a better basis for policy analysis. So it's something that we'll continue to work on in the factfulness, in the spirit of factfulness. Quick overview of part 2, and then I know that Bruce, we'll probably have a time issue, so I'll let Bruce spend more time on part 2. I'll just quickly go over the chapters. So there's 4 chapters broken down in part 2. The first one looks at what we call the big picture. It's really a landscape on the wider financing flows to developing countries beyond the UN system for the SDGs. Some really good guest contributions in there. From a colleague from Homi Karas, who had a lot to do with the report from Brookings, from many others, from Johannes Lin, and from Ambassador Blanchard on behalf of the Friends Group, well, not really on behalf of the Friends Group, based on his experience with the Friends Group and his experience coming into this area of work. So that's the kind of wider scope discussion here. And on the multilateral resource mobilization experiences and some of the tensions and challenges. That was Johannes Lin's piece. The second chapter in this part is on broadening perspective. So this one takes a dive into looking at a more focused look at the importance of the global South and the dynamics of development financing in the South. Jorge Shediak is here from the UN Office on South-South Cooperation, contributed a great piece with the potential inherent in South-South cooperation on the financing side, and contributors from policy institutes in India and in Bangladesh and Brookings and others really looking at the dynamics of financing SDGs from that perspective. The third one on game changers takes a look across at some of the more innovative and transformative issues in this domain on SDG financing. I'll let Bruce speak more to that, but science and technology, Pedro Conceição did a really good piece on that as a game changer, and there are many others on capital markets, on investment, and on the kind of unlocking on the sustainable financial sector and the global financial system. The fourth looks at innovations back, it brings it back home a bit more to the UN than from the outside in, and looks at some of the innovations that are happening and still need to happen as they relate to the role of the UN and the IFIs, and in particular at the country level, and how does the UN position that role effectively in an environment around blended finance and impact investment. So some very good contributions from colleagues both outside the system and inside the system. I see Judith here from UNCDF, a colleague from UNCDF contributed, and many others, but the font is too small, and even with my new glasses, I can't see all the names there. So I apologize if I'm missing anyone else. But that one is intended to bring home some of these wider outside financing issues and dynamics on the SDGs into what should matter and what does it mean for the UN system in our role going forward. Thank you very much. Apologies because I probably went over time, even whistle stopping, but I'll turn over to Bruce for the interesting bits.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody. It's a privilege to be back here with you. I'm going to try and be very kind of focused and short. I've never succeeded in doing that when I start that way, so I suspect I'll fail again. Jennifer framed it, extremely well in terms of the first part and the second part, and I'd just like to start off with that in the sense that it's important, I think, for us that the two parts are very distinct, and we use very different approaches in the two parts. The first part is all about data, and as Jennifer said, we're kind of proud of it. We're stubborn about it. Henrietta's done a fantastic job for us on that. And it's all about forcing colleagues to think about the implications of that data, and it requires stability. There's no point in doing that if you're going to change the format every year or whatever. So it can get a bit dull, and you might say, well, you did that last year, why'd you do it again? But I think there really is merit in having stability in that part of the report. The second part of the report, as you may have noticed, is very different. It's motivated, I would say, by a very entrepreneurial spirit. Basically, what we do is we kind of, on a day, maybe a sunny day, maybe a rainy day, who knows, we think, why don't we do this thing? Why don't we do financing for SDGs or whatever? And we try and seek out people that we think have something interesting to say. And then we encourage them, entice them by saying they only have to write 3 pages. How can you resist that? And it's kind of important because you can get 2 products as a result of that. You can get a product which is a bit all over the place, and it never kind of comes together because it's just different interpretations or different views. They have merit because they're the marketplace of ideas or whatever, but they don't take you in a particular direction. And then sometimes, unbeknownst to you almost, you get a whole bunch of contributions and you sense that there's a story behind it, that there's something which kind of brings them together. There's still some outliers and whatever, but you feel it's kind of going in a particular direction, and when you're trying to structure it and trying to figure out how to do it, it kind of falls into place in a very neat way. And I feel quite strongly, and I think you would agree, Jennifer, that this was the second case. We went out in all these different directions, and then all of a sudden there was a certain storyline. And very briefly, excuse me, I have this horrible cough. I don't think I'm sick. I don't think I'm dangerous, but I'm noisy, so apologies. So let me quickly go through the phases of this little story the way I see it. The first part, chapter 1, let's call it, is at the beginning really of the of part 2, and it goes to the reality of this extraordinary transformation, just size-wise, in the global economy in the last 20 years or so. And it goes to the transformation, let's say, from a world of scarcity to the challenge of mobilizing currently significantly underutilized resources. That's a very different thing that one is trying to address. The numbers you all probably know better than I do. They're in the report. But we're now, famously the bank and the MDBs published that pre-Addis report on from billions to trillions. I think we're now getting into the hundreds of trillions figures when you look at some of the stuff that seems to be generated these days. And I do think, you mentioned Ambassador Blanchard, I do think that his piece is a really interesting kind of personal story, I think, of going from being quite skeptical, as he puts in the piece, to this idea of we have to have the ambition to understand those big numbers and to look at these issues of scaling. The second chapter is, before we get too excited with these big numbers, is to step back and recognize how far we have to go. And that's Homi Karas's piece on the current funding patterns towards the SDGs. It's, I think, the very important piece that was produced by Deb Bhattacharya on the fact that, what does he call it, wind and fury?
Wind and clouds, but no rain.
Yeah, at the country level. So for all the global stuff, it's not really happening at the country level and in the national reviews, country reviews. And it's also, I would put it in this class, Jeremy Oppenheim's important, I think, contribution on blending and leveraging. But he makes the point that for every dollar that the MDBs spend from public monies, they only manage to generate another 80 cents in the dollar. And he makes the point that if we're going to go to scale and we're going to be able to move, we're going to have to be able to do much better than that. And actually, if you take the European Investment Bank, the EIB, out of that equation, the number falls even more dramatically. So the second chapter is, whoa, there's that big ambition, but you know, are we really getting any close, and what's the role? Then chapter 3, which comes out of a number of the papers, but also comes out of some of the papers in last year's report, is about recognizing that there really has been significant progress in the gradual integration of environmental, social, and governance impacts in business decision-making and risk-taking and all the rest of it. I was astonished, maybe I'm just out of it, but I was coming back on a Swiss flight a couple of days ago, and I was desperately searching for an English magazine to read, and my desperation, I came across Newsweek, and I flipped it open, and there was a full, I don't know if anybody saw, but there was a full-page advert on this and the progress made and the importance of the SDGs and firms' views of all this. You're nodding like did you write it? It's a good try. So I think it is really important to recognize the progress, and a particularly important moment in that, I think, was the report in 2015 on fiduciary duty and the way that concept has developed. As was put in one of the papers, this is the first time that we're really getting to a situation where institutional investors, bankers, insurers, they're all in the room together. So this is one step even better than Alexander Hamilton, for those of you that have benefited from the show. That was just him trying to be in the room. Now you've got everybody playing in the room, so it's the perfect scenario.
Where it happens.
Where it happens, that's right. That takes me to the next chapter, which is, if you got all these people in the room together now, what's happening conceptually? What's happening with the ideas of how to move forward? And here I think there's some really interesting and important stuff that's been produced by Karine Ab on focusing on finance impact, Simon Zadek with his focus on needing to get into the guts of the system itself. You can't play around at the fringes. I thought the piece from the colleagues from the bank, Reichelt and Keenan, on moving from green bonds to sustainable capital markets is another in that category. It's not that there's a particular tag that gets you in. It's that if you're going to go to institutional investors or other types of investors, you've got to get it clear on the impact side and on the measurement side. And this really comes under the chapter that Jennifer covered on game changers. This is where it begins to translate into interesting and radical new ways of doing things. And from there you circle, as Jennifer did too, you circle back to the issue of what do you do, what is the evidence of innovation in the multilateral instruments. There we have, I think, a great piece by Magdi Amin on the potential of the new IDA 18 private sector window. We have Bjorn's piece, and let me also add how grateful we are to Bjorn Gilzada with his support over several years now on this report and helping us with the connections with the banks. So we're very grateful for that. And this is these contributions are really important. Yannick Glemarek did a piece on the potential of the country innovation platforms. I'm not quite sure where that is currently. And John Morris, Richard Bailey, who I think is here somewhere, and Lisa Arrhenius, who has left us now, but they all made contributions on insights at the country level. Let me finish with 3 takeaways for me. I don't want to implicate anybody else, but obviously we've talked about these things a lot. 3 takeaways in terms of implications for the UN and for the UN system. Firstly, to me, the storyline suggests that it's really important for the United Nations system to be clear, to get clarity on the kind of assets that it can deploy to support the blending or the leveraging or whatever agenda. The Bretton Woods, when you talk about leveraging, it's about leveraging their financial resources. What is the equivalent, if I can put it that way? The UN has a lot of assets. Money is not necessarily the only asset to be taken seriously in that sense. So I think that's a really important question. I think there's a lack of clarity on it, and I'm sure people would have very different answers. Secondly, looking at and very, I'm sure, quickly and lightly, but looking at the work of the multilateral development banks and the World Bank in particular, I can't imagine pursuing this kind of agenda without a very, very strong partnership between the United Nations system and the World Bank specifically. It seems to me that it's a no-brainer because you're going to be looking at different types of assets. And the third point and final point is that if we believe that the financing of the SDGs is critical, and if we believe that the UN has an important role, or could have an important role in that activity of the generating and the leveraging part of it, then it seems to me that it's important that leveraging and going to scale and this kind of stuff is intrinsic and integral to the movement of the reform agenda in the UN development system. It can't be a kind of marginal add-on. I'm not saying it is now, I'm just saying it can't be that. It shouldn't become that. It needs to be central to the vision of reform itself. So with those, I hope not too long words. Thank you very much, and back to you, Henrik.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you, Bruce. I'm going to be very short here, so we have time for Q&As, but Ambassador Rattray, I would like to turn to you also from just a few comments from the Friends group around financing. We have the Ambassador of Canada who's made a contribution, but perhaps you would like to give us some further reflections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henrik, and good afternoon to everybody. It's really impressive to see the turnout today and so many familiar faces. Elliot Harris, our chief economist, and Susan McDade from UNDP, and many others in the room, Natam Abde from World Health Organization. I think it's a mark of how important this issue is to everything that we do. I'm going to have a slightly different take on the matter. I'm not really going to focus my remarks so much on the financing of the UNDS, but rather to speak more generally about the prospects for mobilizing finance generally. Quantifying the financial resources that it will take to implement the 2030 agenda is really no easy task. And to be truthful, estimates are all over the place. So let me stick with one that I've used before and which may have some measure of credibility because the person who I've gotten it from is one of the contributors to this report. Homi Karas, in a paper that he did with his colleague John MacArthur, they're from Brookings. They estimate, and I think this may be on the high end, but all of the numbers are high, that it will take between 5 and 7 trillion per annum. Just think about that for a second. $5 and $7 trillion per annum to implement effectively on these SDG commitments. The resources that are available to us as governments, because we hear a lot about DRM, and these resources obviously are finite. They are bounded by your ability primarily to raise taxes as a government, and there are many governments that are, let's just say, fiscally challenged. And there are others of us who are designated as middle-income countries who have graduated, and so we don't even have access to those sorts of concessional finance flows. And so when you look at domestic public or international public, I mean, ODA as a percentage of what exists with respect to private capital is really minuscule. So when you look at what we can do as governments to finance our own implementation or rely on the international system to do that, it's just inadequate. So we have to devise ways of incentivizing the capital markets and global investors to play their part, which is easier said than done. The question of why private capital has failed to reach SDG projects is central to the motivation behind the establishment of this GOF that you've been hearing about, this group of friends of SDG financing. It's approaching 2 years now, and as you heard, I'm co-chairing that with Marc-Andre Blanchard, the PR of Canada, and we've been doing a lot of meetings with people who are actually in the business of allocating, deploying this capital. Notwithstanding the sizable gap that I just mentioned, sufficient capital does exist out there. Total global financial assets have long exceeded $300 trillion. And in 2006, institutional investors such as pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, they held an estimated $84.9 trillion in assets under management. That's in 2016. And this is projected to double by the year 2025. So what we need is to find ways of channeling a greater share of this global pool of institutional capital towards SDG implementation. And given that most of these holdings are in long-dated liabilities, you look at insurance companies and pension companies as well, they should, in theory, be ideal sources of the long-term financing required to fund SDG investments. Moreover, as you know, even though the Fed is making some different sort of moves right now, but moreover, we still are in a low interest rate environment. And you just heard Bruce mention the understanding that these institutions have of their fiduciary responsibilities also play a part. So you would think that with the low interest rate environments and the cautious approach that these institutions are adopting towards in their investments, obviously much of their holdings are being currently invested in underperforming or non-performing assets. Well, these factors provide important incentives for institutional funds to invest in the sort of long-term value-creating investments that we all in this room want to see. And one key example of that is sustainable infrastructure projects. It is unfortunate, therefore, that although investment in real assets, such as infrastructure, can provide predictable and stable returns over the long haul, there is still an inordinate focus, investor focus, on the short term. Elliot Harris is reading my mind and scripting me as I'm speaking. This problem of short-termism just continues to bedevil us or bedevil our efforts, even amongst the pension funds. For example, less than 3% of the capital held by pension funds from the 7 largest pension fund markets is allocated to assets like water, power generation, and transportation infrastructure, which need to be operated, obviously, and maintained over the long term. So as this report that we're looking at now, Financing the UN Development System Open Doors, as the report bears out, infrastructure is heavily underfunded. Globally, we need to invest $90 trillion in infrastructure from now until 2030, which is more than the value of current infrastructure assets. So it's a tall order. The magnitude of the challenge varies depending on the perceived risk-return weightings of investment projects situated in emerging markets, developing economies, or even frontier markets. As such, the conversation surrounding the mobilization of private investment capital tends to be quite different when speaking to someone from an upper middle income country like Jamaica, or from a lower middle income country, or from a least developed country. LDCs naturally and very understandably rely more heavily on ODA and UN funding than middle income countries, and the report bears this out. It notes that UN expenditures are highest among low-income countries, with most of it directed towards non-development related activities. You saw the slide, because you had the development system, and then you had humanitarian relief, and you also had, I think it was peace and security related aspects. So the the question is how to devise a solution that not only includes private capital in the discussion surrounding SDGs financing, but also incorporates low and lower middle income countries. And this presents a challenge. You know, our group of friends, we started off modestly, but in short order, we were up to 60 PRs, 60 ambassadors. And it's not just from developing countries. We had most of the developed countries there as well, and we had a lot of emerging market countries in there as well. And I can tell you, you know, sometimes, you know, we bring these people in, I'm diverging a bit from my script, but let me say it anyway. We bring these people in from the private markets, and we're asking them, what would it take for you to invest in a country like mine? We had, for example, a speech given by the Chief Operating Officer of BlackRock Real Assets Group, Anne Valentine Andrews. And we asked her where was BlackRock invested in terms of real assets, because that's her area. And she, off the bat, she said, we're invested in Mexico. And we said, okay, well, I'm not Mexico. And I dare say Mali and Malawi are not Mexico either. So we said, you know, like, where else? And she said, well, that's it. And so we asked, well, you know, do you have an appetite for investing, for venturing further afield? Because, you know, Mexico is Mexico, and, you know, the rest of us are not at that stage. And she said, well, the truth is that in your countries, there just is not enough deal flow. And what she really meant, you know, is not that there is not enough opportunity. There is opportunity. But if you can't structure that opportunity in a fashion where a prospective investor can look at it and can calculate their risk return and can see what their projected revenue is and all of that, well, as far as they're concerned, is not even worth their while. So they look at the Mexico. So when I hear people talk about developing countries in a sort of a homogeneous way, and I'm saying, okay, there are different slices of developing countries that have a different ability to take part meaningfully in this conversation, because when we in the group of friends talk about, you know, looking at private sector to mobilize capital, some of our friends in sub-Saharan Africa are saying, well, okay, or some SIDS like Cabo Verde, you're saying, you know, that may be okay for the likes of Chile and others in the room, but for us, it's a completely different conversation. So for private capital to actually be directed to these sorts of countries, the strategy should include, I think, the use of some incentives. I'm talking about credit enhancements and guarantees, those sorts of facilities, in order to not only augment investor returns, but to de-risk the investment opportunity or the proposition coming out of these markets. And here is where I feel, and I'm looking at Bjorn, here is where I feel that the IFIs and DFIs can play a catalytic role in mobilizing this capital. Although, as is noted in this report, the total mobilized private capital so far has been relatively small compared to total development flows. And I think the report says it has been only $26.8 billion mobilized in 2015, which is a real drop in the ocean when you're looking at the 5 to 7 trillion per annum that we're talking about. So what we're trying to do in the group of friends, I mean, we have these forums of engagement with the private people, the people that are asset owners and asset allocators, and that's all good. But at some point, we said to ourselves, we need to make this thing a bit more practical. So we got a core group of our members, all of them developing countries, and together with the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which has underwritten the complete cost of this activity, we have partnered with the Global Center for Sustainability at the University of Maryland. We have partnered with CDP, which is a company involved in global disclosure systems, provides information to investors and to companies. And we have underwritten the expense of bringing people from these countries from capital to New York for a series of retreats. And we have assembled, I think it's about 30 different players from the private sector. And we put them in a room with these 30 private sector people, together with World Bank is in there, ICBC of China, Munich Re, some insurers, some reinsurers, some pension funds. BlackRock is there, JP Morgan Chase. And we have asked them to come to New York with a portfolio of about 3 or 4 different public investment projects in infrastructure that they want financing for. We have said to them, it has to be like a minimum to altogether of $400 million. And we want to put you in a sort of a Shark Tank environment We want you to present. We're going to give you 10, 15 minutes to present these projects to the assembled people from the private sector. And then they are going to, I can only call it, interrogate you, you know, in terms of how robust your financing model is, etc. And they've been through this 4 times now. The last one finished yesterday. We had the last one at the World Bank in Washington, but we normally have it in upstate New York. And through this procedure, what you find is that those project proposals, I can tell you because one of those countries is from Jamaica, their projects are so much more robust now that we want to actually reach to the stage where they're actually investable, investment grade projects. And I'm carrying on too long. I'll just say one last thing because this has kind of gone south. But I'll say one last thing. When you talk about getting institutional money to fund infrastructure development, you have to think about how do you actually do that, because institutional investors are using capital markets. So it's not like FDI where you're actually putting the money in the ground in a country to do greenfield investment. What you're actually saying to them is that you actually have to find some way of enabling them to take up a stake in these projects. So when you're looking at the design development stage, construction phase stage of an infrastructure project, those investors that you need to get in those early stage, which actually has more risk, you need to actually look at it as different from the institutional investors that you're ultimately trying to capture. You need to get a group of committed early stage investors. That could be commercial banks, it could be development finance institutions, some of it could be government, to actually kickstart this project in terms of bringing it through to the construction stage. When that project, whether it is a road or an energy, green energy or whatever, starts to make a profit, you have an operating revenue stream because it's in its operational phase, that is when you can sort of try and see, okay, how can I use the operational revenue from this project to backstock a liquid instrument that can fit neatly into that portfolio of an institutional investor. It has to be liquid, it has to be high grade, but it has to be something that they can access and that they can exit when they want to exit. But you just can't think of it in terms of, okay, they're the ones that are going to be attracted from the outset to actually put their money into a project from the construction phase, and then, wow, we're up and running. So I've encroached, but we can talk a little bit more in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, and not only for what you said, but also how you said it. This is exactly the type of engagement we need in order to move financing. I know some people will have to leave. There's no meeting after this. We'll continue a little bit with Q&A session. Can I just have an indication on who would actually like to take to the floor, and so I know how to balance this? Okay, I will start with you and Dessa, please.
Thank you, Henrik. I'm showing this because this is one of the things that I wanted to say, and then Courtney said it. It's because we come from the same part of the world. We think alike. But this question of the revenue streams that are critical to any kind of private investment, I think it's something that we have neglected in our thinking in the UN. If it is going to be private investment, it has to be profitable, it has to be through projects that are bankable, and they have to be projects at scale, all of which you've touched on. But the question is, what can the UN do to facilitate that? And I think that's a major part of what we can do in countries is facilitate exactly this kind of capacity building. How do you present a project, formulate a project in such a way that it develops a revenue stream that is attractive to the private investor without at the same time encroaching or compromising the social objectives of the SDGs? Because that's a major challenge in infrastructure projects in particular. But my primary comment is to another matter. The one thing that is missing, I think, Jennifer, in the data that you produced is the sectoral allocation of the money that is given to the UN. And I raise this for a particular reason. Back in 2010, when we were preparing for the LDC4 conference, I did an analysis of the sectoral allocation of ODA. And I found that over the last 20 years, the preceding 20 years, it had shifted from 70% allocated to productive sectors to 70% allocated to social sectors, perfectly in harmony with the Millennium Development Goals. Yeah? Then we look now at a broader SDG agenda, and the question is, has there been any corresponding development in the allocation of ODA by sector towards some of the areas that are central to the SDGs? Now, why that's important for us is because so much of our funding is earmarked it obliges us to follow that kind of sectoral allocation of the donors. And if they are not allocating money in sufficient quantities to things like industrial development or climate change, then we, earmarked as we are similarly constrained in providing that kind of support to the member states. Given that a lot of what we will have to do is in the area of norms and standards, and you've pointed out that last year, or in 2016, that smallest share of our functional activities is actually declining, I see a real problem, because this is the area where we can make a singular and unique value-added contribution that nobody else can. The second thing is, Ambassador Rattray, you spoke about the enabling environment. That is right, and about de-risking, that is right. You can do that through, as you said, blended finance, credit enhancement, and other financial instruments, but you can also do that through an enabling and predictable policy environment that takes away some of the policy risk that's a major impediment. And that policy environment is something that the UN is, I think, well placed to contribute to. But again, that is perhaps something that is inhibited by the nature of the financing the nature of the funding that we receive. And so I throw that out there as a challenge that we face in our discussions with our donors, is how do we create the space for us to do what we can do better than anyone else? Because for us to go and start doing blended finance, well, we're not going to get very far. We don't have that much money. The World Bank is way better at that than we are. But we can provide on the ground, on an ongoing basis, a kind of enabling policy support that countries need, both to formulate projects, to set up the right kinds of frameworks to encourage private finance, and at the same time to provide that kind of perennial de-risking that you cannot do through financial instruments, because otherwise you end up subsidizing the profits of the private sector through public money. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll come back to you, Jennifer, on the first question on the sectorial allocation there. But can I please turn to Mr. Gilsetter and World Bank?
There we go. And thank you all for the presentations today and the discussion. It's rich and it covers a lot of ground. And there's been plenty of references to the World Bank Group, and thank you for those. And it's nice when they're so positive too. So and Ambassador Rattray, your leadership on these issues has, I think many of us feel that the narrative in New York is changing, and the financial literacy among the New York crowd is going up so quickly, and it's just a great development. It makes our engagement from the World Bank side with the UN so much easier. We're starting to speak a very similar language. We have been pleased to contribute to this report over the years, as in different people over the time. I have personally been involved with the team for many years now, and I think, and that's where my point that I want to make today is that this report and your work really fills a gap, a data gap that is out there. And Hans Rosling actually pointed this out, I think, in 2013, 2014, in a seminar we had in Stockholm, where he was asked by the government to look at the quality of data on the multilateral side, multilateral funding, and he was scathing. He was scathing, and so I'm so glad that you're stepping into that space. I used to be with the OECD for 3 years, so I dare to say this, and I don't know if my colleagues here from the OECD, they used to have a multilateral aid report, which is relatively similar to this. We need reports. We need that report. We get all the good reporting from the individual institutions, but few are able to pull it together. I appreciate that you devote a chapter to exploring data quality, and that you're being honest where the weaknesses are, and that includes how we're tracking the financing for the SDGs by our respective institutions. And there's a very concrete box by WFP on how they do it. That is precisely where the World Bank is going right now. We're trying to look at how can we track our funding. It's not enough to say that everything that the World Bank does is about sustainable development. The institutional investors who invest or to provide us with the funding, that's not enough for them. They need to be able to. They want to know. So what's the impact, and specifically where is your funding going? So we will be inspired by those chapters. And one of my colleagues who contributed to this report is from Treasury, the Treasury Department in the bank, and she's specifically working on that as we speak. To do that work is sometimes difficult with if you're only using your own budget, the institution's own budget. Sometimes you need a bit of funding from the outside to do that, to encourage, to give the carrot. And that's where I want to come to the piece that a colleague of mine and I wrote about a World Bank Group partnership fund for the SDGs, which is a trust fund that we have now set up, and it's operational as of yesterday, which helps to fund the means of implementation, the SDG 17, to support World Bank Group initiatives, working in partnership with the UN and others for catalytic initiatives on data, on finance, on capacity building, on developing analytical tools, and so on. And you will be hearing more about this over the coming months. We'll sort of officially launch it in Bali at the annual meetings in a month's time. But I wanted to make that pitch because it relates very closely to our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Björn. Anyone else like to take to the floor? There's a green light. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm from Russian Federation. First of all, I'd like to thank you for presenting this report and for this presentation. We have been following this publication from the start, and it has proved to be very relevant, and we really do see this as a very valuable source of information. So again, thank you for that. I have one question which is very much general. Are you conducting or planning to conduct any sort of analysis as to one issue that you have been mentioning in the report is that UNDS is the only one of the major players whose resource base is dominated by earmarked resources. So are you doing the analysis as to why this has happened? What are the major drivers that have been contributing to this change? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else that... Well, please, go ahead, Ms. Montier.
My name is Ulrika Montier. I'm new director of BERA at UNDP. And I was wondering if we have, or you have, or we could have more information of the relations between the different sources and how they also... how we can have a better understanding how to unlock also resources, because if we have a finance sector and a private sector being increasingly interested, and we know that there are many hindrances, of many of them being that we don't have the right politics in place with regard to pension funds and so on. So, I mean, have you seen studies, or do you think we can bring that into the analysis onwards as well? The relation between the different sources and the political logic between those relations, and how to unlock financing that way.
So we have 3 questions so far, and I know Kani from UNDOCO also wants to come in here. So I'm also a bit concerned about keeping the ambassadors here. I know everybody's busy preparing for next week. But Kani, please go ahead.
Henrik, and mine is a question really, and it links some of the reflections and the presentations made, which is, to me, this is a great report. Thank you so much for this. The fun part of it is in the sections that talk about the game changers, the wind and the science and the technology and all of that, right? However, we also know that for the moment, at least, these are really playing at the margins, whether it's impact investing, etc. I tend to, the boring part of me tends to agree with the piece right up front that says that if you don't manage to shift gears on private capital, you're not going to get to the volumes. So then I come back to my friend Elliot's point that from a UN point of view, where are those major, the new thinking on the policy instruments and the new institutional, the institutions that we've got to get in there and shift our mindsets to be able to support countries, then change and attract private capital. And I think Ambassador Atre really said this very well. It's not that we want to replicate, or maybe we do, that one of our roles is having, for use of a better word, many more Mexicos out there. And what's our role in that?
Thank you. I also want to say one thing, and thanks to DOCO, we had a very interesting study made on what's actually going on at country level, at the RC's office, in financing, stories that doesn't come out. And thanks to Richard Bailey, who was here, I think he's still in the back of the room, we managed to get some really interesting stories out from Armenia, Indonesia, and from Kenya. I think that's very, very valuable, and it's also one way of sort of getting these stories out. But let me turn back to Jennifer and Bruce. Perhaps you can touch on these 4 issues, and I'll let you divide them up, and we'll try to close directly after. And if there's...
So I'll take the easy one and leave the rest for you. Thank you very much. Those are all great questions, and it would be great to have more time, but please, it is an open platform thing, so anyone who wants to pull people together, pull us together, have a small group discussion diving into where really it's open. That's what the report is here for. So we'd be happy to take the time to do that. Maybe quickly on some of the questions. Elliot, on the sectoral finance breakdowns and data, we haven't done it here in the report. Where we have invested and are moving to, and some of that gets referred to in the data quality section, is the work that's coming on stream now, picking up quite a bit of momentum on the tracking of financial data to the SDGs. So Henriette, a group across the system, there's a system-wide group that's been working on that now for quite some time on how to align the financial systems of individual agencies along consistent, approaches and definitions and tagging to SDGs, so we can begin to do what in the old days was done with sectoral DAC, indicators and coding and stuff, but changing that into an SDG paradigm. So as we said that, WFP has modeled many parts of the system, many agencies have their own systems now for tagging financial flows to the SDGs, but system-wide, it hasn't yet come together, and that's what this work is going on. So what we endeavor to do in future reports then is begin to show some of the early returns on that system-wide work, and the timeline, hopefully by next year's report, we'll have more to say and more to show in that regard. But it's mission critical, of course, for the analytics, for the case, for investment, for all of these things. If we don't have the financial data aligned to the SDG framework across the system, then we won't be able to make that case. So that's work in progress, but there's a good, strong team across the system working on it now. On the question from the Russian Federation on why do we think that picture, a comparative picture across the multilaterals looks like that, we haven't spent time in the report really analyzing it too much. So I don't know if, Bruce, you might want to reflect on that more, but I think the bit of comment that we do have on that is that it does have some to do with the, first of all, with the nature of the UN system in comparison to those financial institutions. So the UN system is, by definition, we put it together in one bar, but that's, of course, many, many, many separate entities, each with its own breakdown of the funding mix. So it's already a fragmented picture within that bar, and then within each of those boxes further. So, and that's different than with IFIs or regional development banks, where it's single institution or close to single institution. And then the other one is the funding system. So the kind of single function replenishment type models that take place with funding the IFIs and with multilaterals is different than the way the funding system of the entities of the UN happen. And so therefore it gives way to a more individual transactional type discussion with the funding decisions and adds up to that picture more. But it is something that I think we could do a little more analysis on for future reports, and I think it's relevant, and we'd be happy to do that. I don't know if others want to comment more. Bruce, shall I leave the other unlocking and Ulrika's comments to you?
Well, just very briefly, because I think we're probably several times out over time. I think that the direction that Elliot was going and that Kani was going on the issue of defining where the UN fits in, and whether it's on the policy sphere or it's the normative sphere or whatever, I think that's so important. I mean, I think that there's a gap in terms of the ambition, the scope, the imagination, and then what's over here, and that's an issue which definitely the multilateral development banks don't have, because it's kind of clearer in a sense. So I just think that's really important. On the issue of sources and the issue that was raised on types of funding and what one's doing, I still, I've said for a while that I think it's very difficult, and I would even say I think it's very problematic to enter into a detailed discussion of types of funding at the non-entity level. I've kind of come to that conclusion after struggling for a long time. I think it's very hard to do it at the system level, because there are some organizations that are 80% humanitarian. Well, if you're humanitarian, by definition, you're earmarked. I mean, that's what it is. There's a crisis and you go there. So to kind of conflate the figures and then the more I kind of look at it, the more I think there's something just not adding up here. And I think this issue, and I go back, I think, to something that you said, Elliot. I think that the issue of identifying things which the UN is in a particular position to do, and which and why those things might require core funding because of their nature. Because if you're getting into the normative area, you really don't want to be funded from one place. You don't want one donor to a huge human rights program or whatever it might be. I mean, it's better having one than none, but you know what I'm saying. It's not really a very wise way to go forward. So I would just put that comment out there. I think that it's so important to get right the entry point on different issues vis-a-vis a system-wide entry point and an entity entry point. And it kind of needs a certain discipline, I think, to kind of refrain from jumbling the numbers. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much. So it remains for me to close, and thank you all for a very, very sort of interesting discussion, and for also allowing me to go slightly over time. I'm very sorry for that. We always say that this report is timely and so on. Of course, this year it really is, because of the SG's upcoming meeting on financing connected to reforms. And it goes without saying that you can neither advocate or support reforms, and neither can you actually manage reforms without understanding financing. And this is more about reforms. This is about system change. It's about moving from funding to financing. So I think in that way it's really important that we do understand this. And thank you very much, Ambassador Rattray, for explaining this and putting that into the wider picture. And also your remarks, Ambassador Skog. We often, refer to these reports as something, and the last one was called the Purple Report, and I guess this one will be referred to as the Door Reports. And since, Bruce, you continue to hammer in this Hamilton musical, but then the Doors, as they said in one song, people are strange if you're a stranger, so is financing. It's strange if you're a stranger to financing. I hope we can, with this report, break on through to the other side. So thank you very much for coming to this presentation. We look forward to next year's. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sergio Berdad, and I currently serve as lead of Global Graphics and Communications at the United Nations Postal Administration. It is my distinct pleasure to have worked on this issue of stamps for UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. For 2017, we are showcasing sites along the Silk Road. First, a brief background on UNESCO. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization seeks to encourage the identification, protection, and preservation of cultural and natural heritage sites around the world that are of outstanding value to humanity. The Silk Roads were an interconnected web of routes linking the ancient societies of Asia, the subcontinent, Central Asia, Western Asia, and the Near East. These contributed to the development of many of the world's great civilizations. These routes served principally to transfer raw materials, foodstuffs, and luxury goods. However, these vast networks carried more than just merchandise and precious commodities. The constant movement of peoples, merchants, and goods along these routes brought about the exchange of knowledge, ideas, cultures, and beliefs. This had a profound impact on the history and civilizations of the Eurasian peoples. The Silk Roads were listed as UNESCO World Cultural Heritage in 2014. We create each issue in 3 languages: English, French, and German. In addition, these issues are valued in 3 currencies: dollars, Swiss francs, and euros. We have created 6 stamps representing various sites along the Silk Road. Firstly, we've featured the Longmen Grottos in China and the Suleiman II Sacred Mountain in Kyrgyzstan. These are issued in English with a dollar value. They are followed by the historic center of Bukhara in Uzbekistan and the Kunya-Urgench site in Turkmenistan. These are issued in French and have a Swiss franc value. We round off the set of 6 with the historic Tabriz complex in the Islamic Republic of Iran and the city of Safranbolu in Turkey. In designing these stamps, it was my intent to give proper homage to these incredible and beautiful places. I hope the collector comes away with an impression of the vast tapestry of color, texture, and spirit of these rich cultures. For more information on the sites along the Silk Road and how to purchase these postage stamps, and information on previous World Heritage sites we have showcased, please visit us at unstamps.org. Thank you.
L'Ebola, c'est une maladie dangereuse, contagieuse et meurtrière, facilement à éviter. Si nous devons respecter les règles d'hygiène, nous devons nous laver les mains régulièrement pendant les 5 moments critiques.
Je suis Jean-Pierre Massoukou, chargé de la communication d'urgence Ebola. Je travaille pour l'UNICEF. Dans la lutte contre l'Ebola, je vais dans les marchés, je les transmets les messages sur la prévention, les bonnes pratiques d'hygiène pour éviter la provocation. Et je les transmets aussi les messages de pouvoir alerter au service de santé en cas de cas suspects dans la communauté. Je suis très fier de travailler dans la lutte contre Ebola ici à Béni pour libérer mon pays de cette maladie mortelle. Je suis très content de travailler au sein de l'UNICEF parce que l'UNICEF joue un rôle crucial dans la lutte contre Ebola.
Voilà, on va continuer après.
Moi, j'ai bénéficié aussi le vaccin. On doit toujours se protéger.
Jua jinji kia mfikile kia itabijane ne mwanamba atome vya mavaxe ya mwanda wa misongo ya mtene ya polio. Natalukile najimpela ne bana bami avaye wabajiba ya kunompela nabo nombola mukajena mbake bakitomabyo hano hakutana mwana abakanonda mukaji mona jika mukarire mba mwana yaule wakumulangula mwana maulonsa jina kanengi tubanda nanji mpaka kwa dispensaire ya leta baita bamupima abaya kusela bipimomba misongo ya polio nami nemwibi monemba ibintu ya jina shu ya bine.
Pour convaincre les parents qui refusent avec leurs enfants, on marche avec les témoins de cet enfant qui avait attaqué aussi les maladies des poliomyélites. Pour les convaincre, dit comme ça, moi aussi j'ai refusé avec mes enfants pour faire vacciner. Maintenant, ce qui m'est arrivé aujourd'hui, mon enfant ne marche pas très bien. J'ai perdu beaucoup d'argent pour faire soigner mon enfant là. Les parents qui refusent avec leurs enfants, comme le témoin il a témoigné, lui aussi accepte pour faire vacciner ses enfants.
Butule se ekale kujumuka hakino kya untene ajumukile hami wa mwanda amwa halwami ne mujumuke Ninkiji kukahela moka jukwa wami mwana kutoma vyale mbwana shajimo.
Awa malado tozo kutango eza ba nini diarrhée pe ba malaria wana ba pasi oto treta kango awa yango wana. Salo ngana sala ka ngana zo consulter bana o bayaka na bango. Bon so na moins que pe baye na mwana nde etane za normal te to ko sa pe référence ni ko comme c'est na centre de santé o ba pesi kisi. Bon, na tango a liboso, tango tozaki osa référence, pe kotinda bana na makolo, ezo prendre temps mingi, ezo sala ba 3 heures de temps, bo siko lokola velo pe esungami na MSF, tozo sala 1 heure po tokoma na centre. Siko lokola velo pe ezali, ezo sunga biso mwa mingi penza na santé na bana.
Isingi ya bakane ga dum sone isi du dabba daga de mbo de mu da dabde
awum kharat dal se war mamba unsene daye fujiba de frata kabu imbakan na nyabare na aye jibade dari afarar mamba
The immediate challenge here is food. They have arrived without personal properties, and they need basic commodities like cooking set, they need water, they need shelter, they need health care.
Because this young kid cannot be taken to that environment. It's very hard for the health case. So it is not good that let me provide a shelter for her until she will get a better place to live.
La danse touche toutes les catégories des personnes, quel que soit ton poste de pouvoir, quel que soit ton âge, quelle que soit ta race, quel que soit ton pays. C'est quelque chose qui peut construire un être humain. Quand je regarde comment ça se passe, comment tu arrives à donner l'envie de vivre, à réveiller l'espoir à des milliers de gens comme ça, c'est formidable, c'est incroyable, c'est inestimable.
La danse, je suis impatient. La danse donne le courage, la force. Dans mon rêve, je veux aussi devenir un grand danseur. Pour que d'ici demain, je devienne quelqu'un aussi pour former les autres.
6, 7, 8. On leur dit, il faut croire à la vie, il faut croire que c'est encore possible et l'espoir est encore possible. Et c'est moi qui... C'est fort. Mais on va continuer. To be continuous.
Shelter manale, dori manale na. Iko aspiko na. I'm a second. Chanove. نوتنا النور موت كم نجي خوارمه هوتنا أتشوما نوتنا ذا المرخمة أنا دور غمه
He wanted to work and he demonstrated this from the beginning. He was serious and very effective in everything. And of course, he wanted to learn the job.
بعد فکر این یه جوری بود که من حتی شبا میخوابیدم خواب میدیدم، کابوس میدیدم، استرس خیلی داشتم. میام سر کار یکم خسته میشم، وقتم میگذره، شب میرم خونه راحت میگیرم میخوابم.
To leave your place and your house, it's a very, very difficult decision. And you don't do this for simple reasons. And especially, you don't do this only for money.
آدمای خوبی هستن، مهمون نواز هستن. درسته ما مسلمانیم، مادرم حجاب داره، خواهرم حجاب داره. که آرزومه همین الان منو بفرستن پیش خانوادم، مادرم و خواهرم رو بفرستن پیش پدرم. من یه دونه پسر دارم و خانومم، تمام زندگیم همونا.
Boys, it's before they afraid. Here it's okay. They calm. They are more happy.
We hope starting a good life.
No, very good. Only good life.
Not very, very good life, only good life.
I saw his genuine interest for the children, the parents he was meeting, the dialogue that he managed to create in such a short time. I think this is promising, and I think it will remain in his heart. But I told him how much Greek people have been showing solidarity. I think that's the first message that he has seen himself. But this solidarity can only last if, in the conditions that Greece is facing, it is helped by international solidarity.
مشتاق ارجع على هالبالة هوية، مشتاق اشوف صحمة سلتسو والحمدية، تجي صوت المدفعية وخدنا دولاب ورجع عنه للسورية، صار لو كانت بجسمي. كنت خني بالبيت عمري 9 سنين، كنت احط اول شيء ما كان براسي الفن. كنت يا سوري ما حنعمرها ما في رجوع، من هذا الدموع. كنت اسمع هدول او التصوير مثلهم، اروح احط السماعات مثلا وارتن شوي 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 حبيت اني ادخل بهذا المجال ودخلت وصلت هذا.
I explain all the words, also for the Romanian children and also for the Syrian children. The text of the song I want to explain to know each of them what they are singing.
حقيقة حلم للطفل، وكويسة إنه شعور الأم إنه ابنها يعني شلون بدي أقول لك، يعني شيء حلو إنه واحد إنه أولادها يكونوا هيك بالكولور.
هلا أنا بفضل أكيد الراب لأنه هيك أخاني شوي إنه مثل بيخنوا عندهم بحة صوت.
Even when I was in Syria, I had this idea that music doesn't have a nationality. My oud is my way to express myself to the world, to the life. Mixing music from here and there, it was always coming to mind, actually pushing to my mind.
We have to work with two different traditions. So it's European tradition, which is new for him, and Oriental tradition, which is new for me.
I guess it's the first time like a solo of oud going to happen on this stage of the conservatory from Bucharest. It's kind of like between panic and excitement.
بعدتم عن العينين فازداد حبكم وغبتم وأنتم في الفؤاد حضور. بسوريا أنا ولدت في بيت فني، كان والدي فنان وبعدها تعلمت الإنشاد على إيده. شمس الشموسة يلا بينا نملى ونحلى لبن الجاموسة مثلا.
كونه يجي المركز فشي مهم جدا. الموسيقى بتخلق جو حلو جدا بيجمع الكل، سودانيين سوريين مصريين، فالناس بتتبادل الثقافات مع بعضيها يعني.
سلام يا بهية رد السلام عليا الورد كالك مستهام.
كل الإنجازات اللي أنا بتمناها يعني بشوفها بغنية، بشوفها على مسرح بردة فعل الجمهور، يعني هو الفن تقريبا كل ما تبقى لنا.
لما صورت بالإيكو كانوا 3. بعدين لما رجعت مرة ثانية بيحكي لي في 4 كمان واحد. تفاجأت. معجزة هيك، حاسة حالي شيء نادر، بس نفس الوقت حلوة يعني ال4 هيك بتطلع عليهم، خاصة لما يكون النايمات ال4 سوا. واحدة لها طبع، واحدة عنيدة، واحدة مشرانية، واحدة هيك هادية، واحدة بسيطة، كل واحدة لها طبع. أتمنى لهم حياة حلوة تكون متوفرة لهم كل شيء، بس صعبة يعني ما عم بقدر أأمن لهم كل شيء حاليا. نحن يعني عشنا حياة حلوة وبتمنى مثل ما عشت أني هن يعيشوا.
للبقائهم أحياء طبعا بدهم الدم وبدهم العلاج. المبالغ اللي أنا كنت أدفعها لا يتجاوز 3 دنانير. بعد 1/3 صار في تكاليف كبيرة جدا، يعني كان المبلغ يمكن يوصل ل 3500 دينار. أنا إذا بدي أدفع مبلغ 80% يتجاوز ال 2500 دينار، وهذا مبلغ كبير جدا أنا ما بستطيع عليه.
هاي مصير حياة، لو وقف حياتك وقفت.
لا أستطيع تأمين تكلفة العلاج لأبنائي. طبعا أكيد أنا بشعر بيأس. فهلا حاليا أنا بدي أشوف أطفالي قدام عيوني قاعدين شوي شوي بيذبلوا قدامي.
تعذيب وضرب وقتل وإهانة وجوع وبرد وخوف يعني شيء لا يوصف. يعني على الحدود جيت على نقالة حامليني حمل. الوضع المالي سيء بشكل، يعني تصور انه البعض منا الدواء استغنى عن الدواء لانه ما معه حق دواء. بلشت استلم المساعدة النقدية، يعني نفسيتي تغيرت، صرت اشتري ادوية وصرت ساعد الوالدة بدفع اجار البيت، كثير فرقت معي. تحسنت يعني نفسيا، تحسنت وجسديا تحسنت. بس اذا بدهم يقطعوها انا مضطر اني انا ووالدتي ارجع على سوريا. لو بدنا نموت يا اخي، بس ما راح نمد ايدنا ونكون متسولين، يعني ما راح نتسوى.
زوجي هو يأمن كل شيء، وهلأ أنا لوحدي يعني عم ربي عيلتي. أنا بالمساعدة المالية بقدر أنا أدفع على الأجار الأوتوكار. أنا بقول لهم لأولادي إنه أنا ما رح ورث لكم شيء، إنه بعد ما مات بيكون أنا ما رح ورث لكم شيء، أنا بقدر أعلمكم، بقدر أشتغل تعلمكم أنتم، بس تتعلموا أنتم من خلال شهاداتكم أنتم بتجيبوا اللي بدكم إياه.
They are able to go to the bank whenever they want to withdraw the money. It gives them dignity, and it gives them the freedom of choice, and it's really important for them.
ما بنزل، ما بروح بترجع حدا.
Kanya gutana uwet, kanya gutana iju uwet ngatan, tur ngatin ngana. Kanya gutana chen iju ngana chode. Tagar dada kanne kitala akto, kaune kal. Dama nyamu more chawal, katidan anggal. Gedal. Ma wala wal more kanwe. Bale ko korea gon ke ba na ma wen jiji. Wona de langan kanwe na bale, langan ka to e bale langan ka to che ol rumane. Le karre den bala ni tol de tol nanti. Joden chiben di gide bal ngarta ye tol gide. Tagar de da mo wona loji. Joden Mereka nanti balik tak kerja dah, kata dia mana gitu melen coba baca, tapi tol bok tol delta, nanti mana gitu coba baca, orang ke tol dia mah bodoh coba baca cuma tu bok tenniol, bentar coba tunual gitu melen. Kawal, karong keteredoy, makari juga jadi ente. Kagon tiga fitina, maka kun madarsa, kagon kadoy, maka kun madarsa, kanyar kago, kido warganya, maka kun madarsa, gon kanyar naka kuka kibji. Kalau juga madal kan orang dok, makaru kita mungkin ya aku madarsa. Kuen jaruk nana atau tagar data. Tasar ceganne sabit bezul. Kayak dia madarsa obibo.
So these are changes of climate.
Hola, makates bakarang kita, sekarang munos kita nulau tu. Kerong kepala, kerong ketujuan lega, kau terigal wamat. Kerong kamaran lo je, kerong ka kurung ke teman.
أنا عمري 14 سنة. وأنا هنا من الجيل تفرجت. زماننا جا هنا أجل جابني هنا ده كل مشاكل تبنتي زمان هنا ده زمان أبوي كان ما قتله كان إنما نجيني ياو هنا ده ناس كواجا ده قال كلاس كده ناس هنا ده يجيني جوباني ناس على هاي الماما تو ده كله كده جيبه في جوباني يعني نقوم نجيم جينا في جوبه هنا ده ساعة منا وتبيلا نقعد نقول على حاجات يلا مشيت أبوك قال نقول حاجات يلا هو جانا خد فات بدار هنا تربيزة يلا هو قام مسكني زمان مسكني بقى أنا ما بعرف أدمنه ده يلا مسكني قفل خشمي ده نكورك ما عندي قوة عشان نكورك هو بعد كده لقى ماشي برا أنا قال ديش من ده قال زول من الجيش يلا هو هنا هو عندي دبورة أنا ما عندي قوة زول ما عندي قوة يلا يبقى بالله كيف ما زول خلاص هنا قفل خشمه.
Please take action today. Right now, thousands of people are fleeing conflict and terrifying violence in South Sudan. Families have been torn apart by the war and have lost everything. A few days ago, Martin and his family crossed a bridge from South Sudan into Uganda and became refugees. Over 800,000 others have crossed similar border points across northern Uganda. The majority are women and children, exhausted, hungry, and suffering the trauma of rape and indiscriminate killings. It's a heartbreaking scene. These people had families, have homes, had belongings, they're part of a community. That's absolutely devastating. This emergency is fast becoming one of the largest and most urgent refugee crises in the world. UNHCR is here on the ground, working non-stop to provide shelter and food and water and medical care. But UNHCR needs help. We can all play a part in supporting refugees like Martin and his family.
I asked him for a piece of land provided me with.
We were thinking that the refugees who are coming to our side, they're worse people. Our people were fearing them.
Jackson is a cool friend because what he has done, not many has done.
NGOs bring different activities through refugees. They were given ox plow, they were given some seeds to plant, they were giving goods. Our community are benefiting through refugees.
Every relative of mine benefits from this garden. They praise me as a hardworking man.
I thought that even I would deliver on the way. My stomach begin to pain. Nobody even can help me. God even help me. For a short period of time, I deliver baby daughter. My husband even is not there. I don't know where is he ran. I'm the one giving now my children.
I have 3 children. I tried to call him. He cannot even respond. The phone is off. If he's there or not, I don't know. Maybe they kill him because those people, they gun many people there.
Samira Hassan is lucky to be alive. 2 years ago, an armed militia attacked her village in Central African Republic. She and her children survived. The rest of her family did not.
دا كنا نشوف النار قاعد يقوم من البيت بس وقام جسد قاعد في الشارع لقينا أواتير قام جات شعلانة الناس وايدين دا أخواني دندسوا في الجامع أخوي واحد في الجامع يقتلوا وواحد ده مع أمي داخل بالبيت يقتلون.
Samira's parents were originally of Chadian descent. In a rush, she left everything behind, including identity papers. Without papers, Samira can't work.
الصغير ده بيدور بياكل بيلقى شغل بياكل ده اخر كنا شو الشيء انت سويته له كل صغير لقي ده اكل ده اخر المهم ان ده الحمد لله نلقى ناكل ونشربه لكن كذل ابنك ده يوم اوبيتال زمان ده نلقى ده وساقي اوبيتال اثر الا قرص سو اردناس بارا ده كل في بقرص.
An estimated 75,000 people of Chadian descent have fled the war in Kar. They're at risk of becoming stateless, stranded between the home they knew and a country that doesn't recognize them. But there's hope. With support from UNHCR, local authorities have started providing identity papers. Samira and her children now have birth certificates.
دونك انت عندك اوراق ده اي مكان تمشي ولا تلقى تقول وكان ما عندك اوراق ده ما تقدر تسافر مكان ده بس ندوروا اي اوراق لكن جينا ده الحمد لله اي شيء ندوروا ده لقيناه خلاص.
If she can move, she can work, allowing her and thousands of others to come out of the shadows. They may never be able to return to their former lives, but can finally build new ones here.
Tabanga tunatoma kanawo tushinyi mlonga ka amtoto ama tuna kwa badika tabanga tunefa nuluma ngoka kwa kama na sapo kana shahatu ma mocha manzuo mocha meka yuma.
Coming up on 21st Century. Nuclear testing, a small island off Chile and a tsunami. Making the world a safer place in spite of a natural disaster. In Mali, a violent insurgency in the north.
Il veut prendre les enfants. Il y a madame qui me dit, ah, nous, il faut qu'on sorte. Je dis, où on va faire?
A family's quest for safety. Thousands of victims of sexual violence and the struggle to help them in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Aucun médecin n'a été formé pour traiter les violences sexuelles, aucun. Maintenant, nous avons des formations, mais ce n'est pas dans le cursus normal d'un médecin.
One doctor's determination to provide healing. Hello and welcome to 21st Century. I'm Daljit Dhaliwal. Robinson Crusoe Island, a place so remote that the famous novel by Daniel Defoe was inspired by its history. But the island's modern-day role is far from fictional. Today, it's a crucial link in the planet's security network, keeping a constant lookout for seismic events, both natural and man-made. 700 kilometers off the coast of the South American country of Chile in the Juan Fernandez archipelago, the towering volcanic mountains of Robinson Crusoe rise dramatically from the Pacific Ocean. Far from most anywhere, few live here, and only a handful will ever visit its magnificent shores. But just like in the novel that inspired its name, paradise can change in an instant.
Tsunami, para nosotros, tsunami, no sé, para mí, un tsunami, no sé, nunca lo asimilé que iba a ser así tan terrible, salirse al mar.
Juana Barreras will never forget the early morning hours of February 27, 2010.
Hoy se cumple un año más del desastre del tsunami.
In February 2010, a massive 8.8 magnitude earthquake rocked the Chilean mainland, launching a merciless wall of water that would slam into Robinson Crusoe in less than 45 minutes. 16 people died that morning, and the village, home to only 700 people, was devastated. But the destruction from this natural disaster had even further-reaching consequences. Among the wreckage was scientific equipment for detecting a global man-made danger. In 2003, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, the CTBTO, installed a monitoring station on Robinson Crusoe to detect nuclear testing in the Pacific Ocean. But in the blink of an eye, the tsunami swept the station from its foundation.
This is the old CPF that we used to have here. Here was the door. I remember I entered here and there was a two-air conditioning.
Marcelo Rossi was the caretaker of the Robinson Crusoe monitoring station.
We used to have two systems of dishes here. This weighed a lot, and those were swept away from the tsunami. The other one is underwater. Over there.
When the earthquake struck, sensors from the island's unmanned monitoring station automatically relayed a signal around the world. It's up to national authorities to issue an official warning. But people on the island itself didn't hear anything until the very last moment, when a 12-year-old girl picked up an urgent call from her grandfather on the Chilean mainland. She rushed with her father to wake the sleeping islanders by banging a metal gong. Marcelo heard the warning, but just as his family got into his truck to escape, the massive wave hit.
Y entra el agua muy fuerte. De hecho, la casa que estaba al frente se destruye y la camioneta empieza a subir junto con mi señora y mi hija que estaba dentro.
Marcelo pulled his son to safety, but while trying to rescue their daughter, his wife was swept out into the bay.
Me comunico a través de gritos con ella y me dice que está bien. Yo no le creo porque la escucho muy deprimida. Ella estaba deprimida porque sintió que había perdido a Isabela y que se había ahogado. Y eso no era así.
The water lodged the truck in the upper branches of a tree, just enough for Marcelo to pull Isabella to safety. Miraculously, the entire family, including Marcelo's wife, was spared, saved by the early warning of a distant gong.
Al menos nuestra familia, yo creo que hubiéramos muerto los cuatro. Nos pilló afuera. Si no hubiéramos escuchado el gong, hubiéramos muerto. No estaría contando esta historia.
After 4 years of hauling away debris and making repairs, Robinson Crusoe's islanders rebuilt the CTBTO monitoring station by the start of 2014. But the equipment was not yet back online, alerting the world to nuclear testing in the Pacific. the type of testing that once propelled a 5-decade-long nuclear arms race during the Cold War.
On the sandy wastes at Yucca Flat, Nevada, a new series of atomic explosions are set off. Tanks are among the obsolete pieces of Army equipment.
By the late 1960s, 70,000 nuclear warheads, some thousands of times more powerful than the first bombs dropped on Japan, had been perfected through testing, many in the Pacific Ocean.
This is Bikini. It is here that the military will conduct the tests with the atomic bomb.
By the end of the Cold War in the early 90s, more than 2,000 nuclear bombs had been detonated for tests on land, underwater, high in the atmosphere, and underground.
Look, nuclear tests have been an issue for a long time.
Lucina Zerbo is the executive secretary for the CTBTO.
It's important to limit the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, which goes by testing. And by doing so, we stop newcomers into the field of possessing nuclear weapons. But not only this, we also stop those who have it to not develop more sophisticated nuclear weapons.
José Miguel Insulza, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chile, to sign the treaty.
Since 1996, 183 countries have signed the United Nations Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, voluntarily agreeing to stop or never begin the testing of nuclear weapons. A treaty signed in good faith, but verified by hard data.
Right now we are at the International Data Center at CTBTO headquarters in Vienna.
Georgios Harabalas is responsible for hydroacoustic engineering for CTBTO.
The IMS, the International Monitoring System, is a network of 321 stations and 16 laboratories to monitor continuously the world for signs of nuclear explosions. In a sense, it's a global alarm system and is unique.
Back on Robinson Crusoe, well before dawn on the morning of the 4th anniversary of the tsunami, Marcelo begins coordinating an international team of engineers, oceanographers, software designers and contractors.
Bueno, es un momento especial porque se está recuperando el sistema que estaba sumergido bajo el agua, ¿no? Tal vez fácil decir, bueno, la estación se fue y no sigamos, busquemos otro lugar. Y sí, es como un reconocimiento también y reafirma la creencia del lugar.
Robinson Crusoe is critical to the CTBTO International Monitoring Network. Just offshore, the transcontinental cable ship, the CS Responder, has 6 underwater sensors called hydrophones that are waiting to be deployed underwater 25 kilometers north and south of the island. Resting at a depth where sound travels great distances, the triangulation of these underwater microphones allows the CTBTO to not only detect but pinpoint the exact location of explosions throughout the Pacific Ocean.
You do hear sound underwater, and if you stick your head in the water while you're swimming and there is a little motorboat even far away, you think it is much closer than it actually is.
Mario Zampoli is a hydroacoustic engineer with the CTBTO.
Because sound travels extremely well underwater, and that is also the reason why these hydrophones can hear explosions and sounds almost throughout the entire Pacific Ocean.
Robinson Crusoe's vertical mountains are also ideal to detect disturbances in the atmosphere. There are 8 infrasound sensors on the island's mountaintops. Worldwide, the CTBTO also uses seismic sensors to detect movements in the ground and radionuclide sensors to sniff out any radioactivity in the air. Data collected by sensors is immediately sent to Vienna via satellite link. The system is fast, and the CTBTO's international monitoring network has the entire planet covered 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. By nightfall, Marcelo and the team must have the monitoring station back online and in communication with Vienna. But first, a 2-inch thick fibre optic cable must connect the hydrophones to the island's central recording facility. The connection begins when Marcelo meets the ship and grabs a line. With the help of a swimmer, this line is brought to shore and the meticulous work of hauling in a kilometre of transcontinental cable begins. As they pull the cable on shore, it's under extreme tension. One small error could snap the cable and set the project back days.
Nosotros no estamos para improvisar. La idea es seguir un checklist y seguir haciendo esto para no de un error pero de un problema crear uno más.
But even this highly skilled team is no match for poor weather. Rain has slowed the project to a crawl, and now the tide has moved out, making it almost impossible to pull in the cast iron split pipe that will protect the cable from human activity near shore. When the tide finally returns at the end of the day, the cable is pulled in. All of this work is ultimately centered around these tiny fiber optic hairs. They are connected and initial tests begin.
CRF is the cable vault.
This is CRF. Okay, everything is checked out. The calibration is complete.
Confirmed. The data is immediately received by the CTBTO data center in Vienna via satellite link. Robinson Crusoe is back online.
Estamos de vuelta en el sistema de monitoreo mundial. Somos parte nuevamente de eso. Y no solamente para tener un tratado internacional, sino que también puede ayudar para otros lugares del mundo en detectar si es que va o no un tsunami.
While Chile works to ensure an early tsunami warning system for its people, the CTBTO International Monitoring System will continue to share its data for a variety of scientific purposes. It can track the fallout of volcanic eruptions, monitor the breakup of Arctic ice sheets, and even follow the migration of whales. And while the Robinson Crusoe station may be monitoring the Pacific once again, the CTBTO global network is still facing its biggest challenge yet. Some countries have yet to give the Test Ban Treaty its full support.
The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty hasn't entered into force yet.
8 countries have yet to ratify the Test Ban Treaty. Without ratification, the CTBTO cannot fulfill its mandate to conduct on-site inspections of suspected nuclear tests.
We can detect an event, we can make the information available to our member state, but we need our on-site inspection capability.
How long will it be before the Test Ban Treaty enters into force? That will be decided by world leaders balancing their own country's needs for security with the threat of nuclear proliferation. On Robinson Crusoe Island, the people already understand how vital cooperation is for their safety.
Somos toda una comunidad que está frente a cualquier situación, estamos todos ahí para ayudarnos y no hace ser especial el sentido de ir. La lluvia, el viento, el mar, todo produce una sensación de aislado, pero eso también te hace más fuerte y puedes resolver sus propios temas, ya sean alimenticios y de convivencia en general.
A rebel group takes over your town and then threatens to recruit your children. This is what happened to the inhabitants of Timbuktu in northern Mali. We follow the story of one man who fled with his family into an uncertain future, just one of over 30 million people displaced in their own countries around the globe.
In 2012, armed rebel groups took over northern Mali and declared the region an autonomous state under strict Islamic law. Over 300,000 Malians fled to the south of the country to seek refuge from the violence. Tens of thousands of internally displaced people have been living in Mali's capital Bamako since 2012. Mr. Bashir and his family are among them.
Je suis forgeron. Je suis l'air forgeron Touareg. Et grand-père et grand-père. Depuis 1973, je suis habitué à Tombouctou. Donc on est installé là-bas jusqu'à mon père même est décédé là-bas, ma mère est décédée là-bas. Après ça, je suis marié, tout ça. J'ai trouvé. Voilà. Donc je suis grandi là-bas, Tombouctou même. Même à partir des mois de rébellion là, tout est coupé. On a entendu qu'il y a des islamistes, des rebelles qui sont rentrés à Tombouctou. On a eu peur. Tout le monde a eu peur. Tout le monde qui voit leur drapeau là, il ne sait pas qu'il ne peut pas rester plus encore. Il n'y a personne qui reste.
The reason people left, one, it was a conflict, there was fighting. Two, there was an imposition of fundamentalist interpretation of Islam, which many people didn't want. But the basic reason people left is they were afraid, and they just wanted to get out of harm's way as quickly as they could and find shelter among their friends and relatives in the south. David Gressley here in Bamako. I'm the Deputy Special Representative for the UN mission here, but also Humanitarian Coordinator for the UN system and the NGO community here in Bamako.
Il veut prendre les enfants, les garçons. Il veut les petits enfants de 12 ans, de 15 ans. On pourra lever ce qu'ils ont dans les cerveaux. Il y a madame qui me dit, ah, nous, il faut qu'on sorte. Je lui dis, où on va partir? Je lui dis, où on va partir? Il y en a 5 enfants de ma famille. Il me dit, donc les enfants, ils sont à l'école. Donc obligé de venir à Bamako à cause des enfants. Lui, il est là-dedans. Lui, il est là-dedans avec ses petits frères. Donc je suis venu à Bamako. Je ne connais pas personne. C'est mon premier venu à Bamako, c'est ça. Dans toute ma vie. Hein. Je n'ai jamais vu Bamako, ce n'est pas l'année passée. Je ne connais pas la route de Bamako, je ne connais pas les marchés, je ne sais pas qu'est-ce que je vais faire. Parce que pour vivre à Bamako, c'est dur. Très dur. Tout est cher. Si je l'ai vu quelqu'un que je connais, il peut me donner 1000 francs pour amener, pour faire manger les enfants. Il y a des autres qui me donnent 5 000. C'est de moi. Je me débrouille jusqu'à aujourd'hui quand même. Je fais les bacs comme ça, les trucs, pour amener au marché, pour vendre en détail. Jusqu'à un peu, j'ai trouvé un peu de clients, des trucs comme ça. C'est là, avant c'est ça que j'ai fait à Tombouctou. Donc c'est ça que j'ai fait, je vends ça, je vis dans ça.
With his meager earnings, Mr. Bashir doesn't earn enough to feed his family. Aid agencies in Mali provide cash handouts so that internally displaced people can buy basic necessities.
It's not a question that food is or is not available in the markets, it's a question whether you have the means to buy it. And I think that the programs that we're seeing right now in terms of providing cash transfers is a very efficient way to make use of market mechanisms to provide access to food.
L'alimentation c'est dur, très nourriture, très dur pour nous. Si tu es resté une journée sans travail, ça te touche. Ça touche même les familles, tout ça, ça te touche. Avec l'aide, je paye la maison, location. Il me reste au moins 10 000 francs pour donner ça à la famille. C'est bon. Je l'achète des riz, je l'achète des mille, je l'achète un peu de lait pour donner à la famille surtout. Donc je suis tranquille un peu. Par une semaine, 2 semaines, je suis tranquille. C'est bon. On vient rentrer, ouais. Parce que chez nous, c'est pas la même chose qu'ici. Tu as ta maison, tout ce que tu trouves, ça se suffit pour toi. Et toutes mes soucis, c'est ça, les 2 choses-là. La maison pour retourner chez moi, en santé. Et c'est tout.
Since war broke out in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 1996, more than 200,000 women have suffered from sexual violence. Helping the survivors tests the limits of even the most courageous medical workers, like this doctor in Bukavu.
Les premières patientes, la première d'abord qui a été là, c'était une victime de violences sexuelles avec des traumas, des balles qu'elle avait reçues. Et donc à partir de ce jour-là, c'était devenu vraiment une crise humanitaire. Aucun médecin n'a été formé pour traiter les violences sexuelles, aucun. Maintenant, nous avons des formations, mais ce n'est pas dans le cursus normal d'un médecin. Le gros défi, c'est d'abord de pouvoir soigner une femme, mais de ne pas avoir la possibilité de la rassurer que je te soigne, je te traite, tout va bien. Parce que je ne sais pas, peut-être quand demain elle va rentrer, elle aura une autre attaque. C'est très lourd à porter, c'est vraiment très lourd. Je suis une femme, je suis une mère. Tu ne sais pas abandonner pour aller faire autre chose. En fait, on devient quelque part activiste, tu vois. Même en famille déjà. Moi, j'ai des réactions vraiment bizarres. Hein. Tu te retrouves, pourquoi j'ai réagi comme ça? Toutes ces petites fillettes qui sont en train d'arriver. Et j'ai une fillette, parfois c'est trop. Notre entourage paye les pots cassés en fin de compte, paye les pots cassés. Les grands moments de réussite, moi, que j'ai personnellement, c'est de voir par exemple une femme qui vient ici à l'hôpital, elle a 18 kilos, elle a tout perdu et que après 6 mois, elle a 55 kilos et elle te dit « Je suis bien, docteur Néné, ça va, je suis bien ». Tu sais, ça... c'est la plus grande joie que je peux avoir.
Ponzi Hospital has been supported by UNICEF since 1998. And that's all for this edition of 21st Century, Sharing the World Stories. I'm Daljit Dhaliwal. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.
describe your style in 3 words, what would they be?
Bold, colorful, and playful. My name is Awo Konate, and my brand is Yao's Creations. So I started with one tailor working from home. So I'll do the designs and the tailor will do the tailoring by putting the pieces together. And then I'll go from door to sell. We had like like garbage storage in front of my house. It wasn't cool to be in the front of the house to start with, and so I asked my parents if I could use it for my showroom, and that's where we started as our first showroom. That was different from what the normal customs or norms of doing things in the Gambia is. A lot of people didn't even think I was Gambian because I was doing contemporary African wear. So the tourists loved what I was doing from the onset. The Gambian market is very small. We don't have a culture where people go out and buy, you know, like when you go to other African countries or in Europe where people are just happy to go out shopping. And so it's a struggle, to be honest. So for me, going to Liverpool and having the chance to meet potential sponsors or partners or buyers that we could supply to make our business grow more is an amazing step. So I'm really grateful to you for that. In our DNA, our other thing apart from just producing quality stuff is to empower the youth. So what I do in terms of youth empowerment is doing events wherein they come and showcase their talent, like talent shows. I go to schools from time to time where we talk about self-esteem, being confident and believing in themselves and realizing their talents. You know, I also open my doors to internships. So when they come in, they also train as to how to do quality sewing. By the completion of the 1 year, they do sew like the professional tailors would. And right now, Gambia is at a level wherein the youths are eager and hungry to be successful or to be job creators or job developers, or, you know, just to help develop our country.